Chapter 20. Gambit. Because survival is not enough. We need to live. Circa 25 days, 13 hours since the assassination of rebel leadership. As Estingai crept through the tunnels of Last Shadow's massive base with Uldina, Meika, and Aiden, she found herself surprised at how easy it had been to slip in with the Iron Peak refugees. Even with the number of people still slinking in after evacuating their base, the guards and personnel taking stock of everyone who entered meant they would be discovered eventually. Estingai didn't plan on being here long enough for that to matter. They'd taken the patches and coats of those from Yaren's part of Uchantu's team. "Where do we go?" Aiden asked as they neared an intersection of tunnels where the crowd grew. Estingai frowned, looking around. "I'm not entirely sure. Kruxi and Svemaku had both been here a few times before, but I was usually back at Wolfden." "You don't even know your way around?" Mika hissed. "How?" Estingai shushed her, wishing, not for the first time, that she could have left them at Wolfden instead of Maryatla. She needed support, though, and Maryatla had cautioned against leaving Meika and Uldina back at the base with no one there to watch them. "You agreed to follow me," Estingai said, voice low enough so only they could hear. "This is my plan." Meika grunted. I'd say plan is a generous term at this point. Before Estingai could glare at the woman, Uldina cleared her throat, pointing to the right. "I've been here before. The command room is that way." Estingai wobbled her head at the woman, then started in that direction. After a few minutes of walking, however, a few shouts sounded down the tunnel and people started flooding through, a tide Estingai and her companions pushed against. Estingai looked to Aiden. "Did you hear what this is about?" Aiden shrugged. "Something about an announcement?" Estingai thought for a moment, then turned and nodded in the direction everyone else was headed. "Come on. If there's an announcement gathering this many people, Mahele will be there." Kruxi waited until the suite had emptied almost entirely before walking inside. He wasn't welcome, and even if a mask with someone else's name on it would allow him to go unnoticed through most of the base, it wouldn't do him much good here. When he opened the curtain to Nomlana and Lysanda's alcove, they both sat up, alarmed. When he removed his mask, flashing a nervous smile toward them, their expressions darkened. Both were in their underclothes, relaxing after their work shift. "What are you doing here?" Kruxi winced at the edge to Nomlana's voice. He knew the man would be hurt, but he hadn't expected it to go this deep. "I said you weren't welcome here anymore," Lysanda said when he was silent. Kruxi wet his lips, then met each of their gazes in turn. "Did you really think I would just give up?" They frowned at him, but didn't yell, and made no move to force him out. He stepped fully into the alcove, closing the curtain behind him. I've been hiding out, swapping masks the past few days to escape notice," he said, then threw the Mitra grin. "I'm technically not allowed to be in the base any longer." "We know," Lysanda said. "We should—" "I know," Kruxi said, raising his hands. "But just hear me out, please. If you don't like what I have to say, I'll leave. I'll even let you help the guards throw me out if you want, but just... please." Lysanda and Nomlana shared a look, and Lysanda studied Kruxi for a long minute before folding her arms over her chest, letting out a frustrated sigh. "Fine." Kruxi smiled, then leaned in a bit, lowering his voice. "You two were right. I was lying to you." "No shit," Nomlana murmured, looking away. Kruxi frowned, but continued. "For the record, I hated lying to you. Both of you. That doesn't excuse it, but... Anyway, these past few days I've been listening to rumors and going over everything that happened since I arrived. Something is wrong." Lysanda snorted. "That's a pretty broad statement." Cruxy took a deep breath. I considered killing Pais. Lysanda and Nonlana's eyes went wide. What? Obviously, I didn't. I just thought she was the spy. That's the reason I'm here. Someone gave away the meeting time and location. Someone gave away Nightstone's location. And someone must have called in Imaya reinforcements to Memphoso. Pais, Mehele, and Kitai were the only ones that knew about Memphoso besides Estingai and Maryatla and the team they sent there. He let that hang in the air for a moment, let it sink in, then added, That's what I thought, at least. Lysanda frowned. What do you mean? Cruxy bit his lip, then sighed. Perché I don't know who it is. I thought it was Pais, but now I don't know. I've been thinking over all the intel I gathered since I got here, and I need your help. I don't know what to do. They were silent for a while. Why? Cruxy looked to Lysanda. Why do you need our help? What can we do? Cruxy took a deep breath. Perché I just need some support. Someone to help me hide until I can catch him in the act or gather enough intel to bring to Mehele. You don't need to let me sleep here or anything like that. Just help me listen for anything I can use and help me not get thrown out. Lysanda and Nomlana stared at him, then shared a look. Please. He couldn't do this without them. Before they could say anything, shouts sounded from outside, followed by frantic conversation and hurried footsteps. Nomlana and Lysanda stared at him for a moment, then rose and started dressing. Put on the mask and come with us, Lysanda said, shrugging into her coat. Cruxy smiled. Thank you. I'm still furious at you, Lysanda said, tying on her boots, then hopping to her feet. She pushed past him out the door. Cruxy dared a look at Nomlana, then winced at the ice in the man's dark eyes. This doesn't change anything between us. Cruxy frowned, nodding. I know. Thank you, anyway. Nomlana grunted. Cruxy moved aside to let him through, then strapped on his mask before ducking out of the alcove. Before they stepped out of the hall, Lysanda rounded on him again. We'll help, but you better not be lying again. Cruxy nodded, smiling beneath his mask. I'm not, and thank you. Estingai and her companions arrived just in time to hear a woman Estingai didn't recognize make an announcement. She stood on a low stone dais before a massive hangar next to a man Estingai recognized as Mehele and a young woman who had to be Vila's daughter. Anorak, Iron Peak's leader, has been murdered. Estingai tensed, nearly falling into a fighting stance before Aiden stopped her. She wobbled her head in thanks before turning her attention back to the dais. The crowd had broken into a cacophony of murmurs, some casual, some disbelieving. Others worried. There were a few who shouted and cried out. The woman on the dais did not speak. Estingai looked to her companions, then nodded toward the dais. Come on. She caught Meika grumble something as she started pushing her way through the crowd. She was firm, but didn't go fast enough to draw too much attention. She'd barely gotten a fifth of the way through before the woman on the dais spoke again. After investigating, this looks like a plot by Estingai and Frozen Phantom, carried out by her brother Cruxy. The children of Cogitere have betrayed us, just as Questrima did. Estingai froze as the crowd burst into an uproar. What? She shook herself, looking back to her companions. Their masks covered their expressions, but their postures were tense. Aiden leaned in. That's not what you sent him here to do, right? Estingai frowned. Of course not. Unless Anorak betrayed us. The man just nodded. Taking a deep breath, Estingai looked back to the dais, brightening her clear notes as she focused on Mehele and his daughter. The man looked stricken, shocked. His daughter was just shaking her head. One of the guards looked like he was trying to say something to her, but she just kept shaking her head. Estingai's original plan of appealing to Anorak and Mahele had been cut to pieces. So she steeled herself and continued to push forward, waving for the others to follow. Diplomacy had never been her strong suit anyway. She was a fighter. There's still something I can do. Karuxi stood frozen as Kitai's accusations sank in. Anorak's dead? That didn't make any sense. Karuxi tensed, whipping around when someone grabbed him by the shoulder. He shrugged it off and stared between Numlana and Lysanda. You know I didn't do this. Their expressions were grim, but they nodded. We know. You might be a liar, but you'd be far more screwed up if you just killed someone, Lysanda added, or if you thought Estingai had anything to do with it. Numlana's eyes widened, and he turned on her. I know he didn't do it, but you seriously believe... Lysanda cut him off with a glare. I don't know Estingai, but I know Karuxi. Lysanda turned her gaze back to him. You wouldn't be nearly as calm as you are right now if you thought she'd pulled something like this without telling you. Karuxi blinked, realizing he was calm. Why and Enoch aren't they freaking out? Then it hit him. Karuxi whirled back toward the dais and brightened his clear notes, focusing on Mahele, then Pais. Both were shocked by Kitai's announcement. They didn't know. Mahele looked like he had lost all hope. Pais, though. She kept shaking her head, mouth open, eyes wide as she stared at Kitai. It wasn't Pais. It wasn't Anorak. And I know it isn't Mahele. That left only one person. Before Karuxi could move toward the dais, however, something happened to his right, just in front of him. People backed up, forming a hole in the crowd. Karuxi raised himself up on his toes to get a better view, and his eyes widened as he recognized the person standing before the dais. Estingai primed her gem crest, whipped off her mask, and unzipped her jacket as she came within a few paces of the dais, Aiden, Uldina, and Meika a few steps behind her. Heads in the crowd turned toward her, and eyes widened. People stumbled back, pushing those behind them, gazing at her in shock. They may not have recognized her face, but there was no way they could have missed the shining, multicolored gem crest at her clavicle. Liar! Estingai roared, fixing her gaze on the woman who had accused her and her brother of murder. She closed in on the woman, but did not ascend the dais. Karuxi is no traitor. The woman on the dais blinked, a swirl of shock and recognition in her eyes. Then she composed herself, standing tall. You and your family are trained killers and spies. Are you really going to claim you've never assassinated an enemy leader or head of state? Estingai gritted her teeth. She'd done exactly that, but this woman is too certain. Estingai stepped forward, pushing herself onto the dais. To the woman's credit, she stood her ground. Estingai kept an eye on this accuser, but angled herself so her words reached the gathered crowd as well. If Karuxi killed Anorak, it's because Anorak was guilty of betraying the Remnant. Even as the crowd broke into mixed cheers and protests, Mahele perked up, fixing his gaze on Estingai. The what? Estingai held the man's gaze. The Remnant. It's what Vila and the others agreed to. One united force to resist the Amaya, instead of bickering factions. A single body focused on escaping the Amaya and this world instead of isolated groups fighting just for survival. She raised her voice and looked back to the crowd. It's the reason the Death Knight came to murder us. It knew we would be a threat, united under a single banner. How did you survive when they didn't? Someone in the crowd yelled. You ran! Coward! Traitor! I survived because Svemaku gave his life, so one of us would make it out. Her words silenced the crowd, echoing through the massive cavern like the crack of a whip. Aiden and the others took the opportunity to gather at the foot of the dais. I lost my husband and my best friend, Estingai said, voice tight as she stared out at the crowd, keeping the woman on the dais in the corner of her vision. When we fight amongst each other, we spit on his sacrifice. She looked back to Mehele. We spit on all their sacrifices. Mehele met her gaze, then dropped it. Estingai looked to the man's daughter. She met Estingai's gaze, but said nothing. The silence of the crowd held the room tight. Her words might have quieted them, but she could feel their distrust, their need to strike at something. As Estingai looked to the woman who had accused her and Karuxi, her throat went dry. The woman did not smile, but there was a hardness to her eyes. This woman knew she hadn't been beaten, and Estingai had an angry mob barely held at bay. She needed to show them who deserved their anger.